Welcome to the RTO Superhero Podcast with me, Angela Connell-Richards, where we'll explore the complexities of compliance and how to ensure business success within your RTO. This podcast is for anyone within the training industry who wants to learn from my experience as an RTO consultant, RTO manager, trainer and assessor, and entrepreneur, as well as the experience of other experts in this field. Listen in and let us help you become the RTO superhero you want to be. Welcome to the RTO Superhero Podcast with me, Angela Connell-Richards, and my guest speaker, Maciek, who's here, also helping me to break down these standards. Well, it's finally here. If you had your head in the sand and you didn't know what was happening on Friday, well, the new standards for RTOs 2025 have officially landed after 3 years of waiting, drafting, consulting and speculating. Maciek, can you believe we're actually talking about the final version today?
Final version, legislated in there, in place.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
It's just crazy that it feels like so long since we've been working on this. And I remember in 2019, we were talking about the skills reform. So it's just been around for so long. So we've been
10 years since the last change.
Yes, and 10 years. Yes, and about bloody time. It's taken long enough. So we're going to be breaking down what we think is different and what we think is just basically what we had before, maybe just some refinements on it. But we've been dissecting all of the draft policies, the practice guides, the draft standards and all that sort of stuff, and then holding our breath, waiting for this to finally happen. Now we finally have our outcome standards, compliance requirements, and credential policy. What's your initial take on it, Maciek?
Look, I think it's great that we finally have something concrete that we can work towards, because I think everyone's sort of been looking at developing, getting ready for this, July 1 start date. But it's always been a little bit nervous. Is something going to change? Is something going to still be, unknown? So it's great that we've now got that clear guidance from it's legislated, it's ready to go. We can now work off a concrete document and get ready for the July 1 start date.
Yeah, and I think also having ASQA confirm that what they're going to be transitioning starting from the 1st of May. And I think that's really important. It means we can actually get down to business now without having to worry about a federal election or anything else changing in our sector. So I've already done a podcast on the new standards, but I really wanted to hear your point of view of these. And from what I've seen is really quality area 1 and 2, not a lot of changes. Training and assessments pretty much essentially the same. And trainers don't need to upgrade their qualification anymore. What are your thoughts on that?
Finally, I think we've got some common sense approach, and it's going to upset, I think, a lot of TAE providers who relied on, that upskilling. And I've never called it upskilling where you go from a Cert 4 to a Cert 4. I've always sort of spruiked the whole concept. If you're going to upgrade from a Cert 4, do a diploma and progress your skill. And then, you've always got that whole fallback on diploma or higher and never had to worry about upgrading anyway. But it's that culture of continuous improvement in yourself that I think also needs to be emphasized. So great that we don't need to update to a new Cert 4, at least from 2010. But it's still, one thing that we really need to make sure that with all of our RTOs is that we've got this culture that it's not just that you've got it and that's it, that you do continue updating your skills, both from a vocational perspective and a training and assessment perspective.
Yeah, and I think that's important for everyone. The amount of times, and this is one of the things I really like about the new standards, is they're now making a requirement that everyone in the team should do vet professional development, because the 100%. Amount of times I've gone into an RTO and the staff have no idea about them.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You're so right, and the concept again. We spoke about it a few last month, I think, where it's that concept of that's the compliance consultant or that's the compliant manager's job. That concept should never exist if the whole of the organisation understands what that culture of compliance is about and understands the standards.
Yeah, totally. And I think when it comes to understanding why we're doing the different things that we do within an RTO, and it's not like the management making us do this. It is a requirement under the legislation of what we need to do.
Yep.
So I think that's really good that they've making it that all team should be undertaking, and including the CEO and directors.
Correct.
Which often get left sort of think, no, I'll send everyone else to that. I don't need to know about the legislation. So
at the end of the day, the buck stops with them. So, they do, whilst they might have delegated authority and delegate power, that at the end of the day, it still is their responsibility. They're the one signing off on everything.
Yeah, totally. And they should understand what the ramifications are if you are non-compliant, because they're the ones that are going to be affected. Yeah. Yep. So when it comes to quality area 2, vet student support, I didn't see a lot of change other than the First Nations. They didn't emphasise the mental health. So it's
Thank
just
God
more
for that.
Yeah,
and I'm a huge advocate of mental health, don't get me wrong, but the can of worms that it would open up in terms of where do you draw the line was always going to be a challenge.
Yeah, it's more of a holistic well-being now.
Correct.
So instead of focusing on, so that was a good thing that dropped down, because I think if we're going to bring in mental health, we need to do it slowly. We need to look at overall well-being. So I think that's a great way to start as well. Okay, so then we get to quality area 3, which is vet workforce, and there's been some significant changes in there with regards to trainers and assessors and what are their requirements, but also PD. But we were just talking about one of the really interesting ones is quality area 4, governance, and looking at risk management. What are your thoughts about the new risk management requirements?
Yeah, so it's as we were saying, it's that pendulum swinging back, isn't it? We had this for many years. We had our risk strategies and our risk matrix that we had to do, and that sort of went out 10 years ago. And here we are back, and I don't think it's a bad thing in any way whatsoever. I think there's a lot of depth to these requirements under standard 4.3. And a lot of people, just like the concept of not understanding the term systematic self-assurance, will also struggle with what risk management is all about, the difference between a risk and ultimately a hazard in that respect, and really just trying to work out how to implement that. And so the main things that I've seen there is, again, that a lot of RTOs, like most businesses, struggle with financial management. And here we've got an RTO must identify, manage, and review risks around financial position and performance and cash flow. And so that's interesting. And then we've got the concept of systems for identifying and disclosing real or apparent conflict of interest, which makes that quite interesting. And then also,
I think that's more to fit and proper person.
Yeah, possibly, and also maybe around agents and who's selling what. And then what I think is a good thing is that whole concept of delivering to under 18s, and that's been very much driven into these standards about the risks to under 18 students, which again has been spoken about informally by some auditors, but never sort of put into writing, even though the legislation has always been there. So these are all, I think good practices moving forward.
Yeah, I think so as well. So I've been around in the industry for a long time as well. And I remember when we used to do risk management under the old AQTF, we think it was 2007. I think it was in 2005 and 2007. And then it was gone when we got the legislation. But I think it is an area where a lot of RTOs, it is a weakness, where they're not looking at the risks within their RTO and how they're managing those risks. also found it very interesting, the financial position and financial performance. And I suppose that comes down to RTOs who haven't been financially viable and running insolvent. So and then shut down, and then the students have nowhere to go. So I think that's good that they've got those in there. I love risk management, coming from a WHS assessor and background in doing that sort of stuff. I think I used to do a lot of ergonomic assessments. I think it's a really good thing, and I think it's going to be positive for RTOs to implement.
Absolutely. It's like the concept of planning and business planning. It's the beautiful thing about risk management is that it's designed. It's not. A lot of people may see this again as similar to a TAS document. It's just a compliance document. But if you change your approach and your thought process behind it from being, it's just, it's for compliance purposes, to actually, this makes good business sense to help identify business risk. It's actually really positive, but you've got to change that mindset away from compliance and legislation to good business practice.
Yes, a holistic approach for your whole RTO, because there's a lot of businesses, not just education sector, who are still being affected by the pandemic, and also with what's going on in America right now and things like that. So we do need to be managing this much better within the RTO, and that brings us to continuous improvement. So continuous improvement is something I never threw out. I always had it as a priority within our policies and procedures. And we're under the new requirements. They've actually, instead of being 2 little clauses, it's now much more expanded. So it's stating that the RTO undertakes systematic monitoring and evaluation of the organisation to support quality delivery and the continuous improvement of services. So when you hear that, what is your thoughts around what an RTO needs to have in place in order to meet that requirement?
Yeah, so I think the key word there is improvement of services as well. Support quality delivery and continuous improvement of services. So it's not just about continuously improving your training products. It's everything. It's your service. It's the support that you provide students. Potentially includes your marketing and so forth. And so when I look at the concept of continuous improvement, again, it's not a one time per year or one audit per year. It's about looking at how your organization incrementally, continually looks at what can we do better with this. And as I've got on my, general profile, it's like, how do you challenge the status quo of what you're doing to make it better, as opposed to resting on what's there and going, that's good enough, right? And I think we sometimes get too comfortable in that position.
Yeah, I think so. I always, and I think we have talked about this before, you should have a culture of continuous improvement throughout your organisation. And I'm glad to see that this has more depth to it than what we've had in the past, because basically it was like, if you were non-compliant with any of the standards, you were non-compliant with 2.2, whereas this is now more focused on, okay, what do you need to have in place? So one of it is that you've got to have mechanisms in place to lawfully collect and analyse data, including any feedback received from vet students, staff, industry, vet regulators, state and territory, training authorities and employers, current or former vet students. So that is very much in line with the new data security requirements as well.
Well, I was laughing at the word lawfully, right? That's interesting that they put that in there, because it sort of makes you wonder what was going on previously for them to want to put that in. But
people used to go to gravestones and take their names off the gravestones and claim government funding.
Let's not go back to the vet fee help days. That's fine.
No.
But yeah, look, I think the concept there of again, students, staff, industry, regulators, and authorities and employers of current and former vet students, I think that really encompasses all stakeholders, or a lot more stakeholders. But again, I think a lot of people, where they drop the ball with continuous improvement is a lot of organizations collect data, whether it's through process and necessity because the standards say so, or actively go out there, but where they sort of not necessarily fail, but don't do things well is they don't take the data, then analyze it, work out how it needs to be applied across the organization, and then start to implement those incremental changes. And often we find that a lot of RTOs will get all of this data, be overwhelmed by the data, put it to the side and go, oh, that's just too hard basket. We won't worry about it for now. Whereas it's really a matter of finding, okay, how do we plan for these changes? What are the small things that we need to do along the way? What's the highest risk that we can identify at the moment? Again, going back to our risk strategy, focus on that as a priority and then filter our way down to the least highest risk.
Yeah. I remember the days of walking into clients' premises and there'd be a box of data they've collected.
What have you done with that?
Hey, what have you done with that? Oh, we've collected it. Yeah. The thing is, nowadays we're doing it all electronically, so there's no excuse really that you are not using that data, because even just using ChatGPT, you can run that data through ChatGPT and identify what the risks are.
Correct. Or what, and what the improvements you can make, based on your scenario. So look, that's definitely where, one of those things where I think our industry is copying a fair bit of criticism at the moment with AI and students cheating and so forth. But if we park that and look at what AI can do for us as in business improvement terms, it's so much more than just worrying about students cheating. It's actually, focusing on how we can speed up those improvement processes.
Yeah. And, AI is one of my favorite subjects, but the future is AI. And when we just on that subject, when it comes to students using it, you should be teaching them how to use it in an ethical manner.
Correct.
And because they will use it in the future anyway in the workplace. I use AI all day, every day. Yep. So it should be part of your role.
I think, and I know we're digressing a little bit, and I don't really want to make this about AI, but I think, people go, oh, AI plagiarism. Like, again, we had plagiarism when we used to open up the physical Encyclopedia Britannica, right?
Yep.
And people used to copy out. Then we had Google, Wiki. So every step along the way, we've had these things. All AI has done is simplified the process. Absolutely. But again, if you use it as a teaching method and encourage students not to do it and put in policies around, if it's identified, you'll be asked to sit there and do it written out, or however you decide to do it within your organization, then there's implications around that, as opposed to simply accepting everything that you've got. So
and tying that back into the standards, that really comes under your risk management as well.
100%.
So,
Yeah.
How are you going to manage that risk management?
One thing I will say that, and this came up in an audit a week or so ago, is, and it was a valid point that the auditor asked, and in the current standards, I think it's 8.5 maybe, about legislation and informing staff and students of legislative changes.
Yeah.
Correct me if I'm wrong. So
the old
one of the
standards
questions
was 5.4.
Yeah, so the current standards that are still there at the moment talks about informing students and staff of legislative changes. And one of the questions that he actually asked is, how have you informed your staff and students now about the impending and now changes that are coming? And so I think that's one thing that any of the listeners at the moment that are running RTOs really need to look at, either putting out a memo or a reminder to all their current staff and students of these changes, and potentially what impact they might have, maybe an internal guide as to how the organisation will be changing. And so I think that's also important to remember that this is a legislative change, and as such, the organisation needs to be informed, and internally they need to be informed as well.
Yeah. On that, I'm just thinking more about risk management. And financial viability. So this is going to be an area where I think a lot of RTOs may struggle, particularly if they haven't been through a financial viability risk assessment. Some have never, others may have.
Some remember the good old days of the old external auditing. Yeah.
How do you think RTOs should identify, manage, and review risks related to financial position, performance, and cash flow without being a financial advisor? What are some of the things that you recommend that they should do?
Yeah, so as the disclaimer goes, anything I say is not to be used as financial information.
That's correct.
I'm not a financial planner.
Yeah.
So look, I think the most important thing is within any business, an RTO is just that. It's a business, right?
Yeah.
And so often we get too caught up in our compliance practices, our compliance processes and so forth. And as a CEO or as a manager or as a board, depending on what level you're at, if you're not reviewing your finances on a quarterly or a monthly basis, then you're probably not running a proper business, right? And so whether it's having a meeting with your accountant on a quarterly basis, looking at your P&Ls, looking at your balance sheets, and looking at how your I guess your lead indicators, not just your KPIs, are functioning, I think it's really important to look at your business as a whole and then go, okay, what would happen if we had a downturn, and look at modeling, just like we do with our training and calendars and scheduling. What would happen now if we only had 10 people enroll in the next month versus 20? How would we deal with that? And so I think part of our risk management approach around that financial position, financial performance and cash flow is really about the what if scenarios, and how to manage those within a flexible, I guess, delivery model. And unfortunately, ASQA has a little bit to answer for here, because their timeframes of processing applications, etc., greatly impact on some of the way that an RTO can practice, whether it's removing from scope or adding to scope. And the dynamic nature of a business sometimes is sometimes negatively impacted by the delays within ASQA. So there's not much we can do about that, though. But you as a business still need to account for that.
Yeah, and I think you should be putting it into your risk management assessment as possible. What are the possible scenarios? One of the things that I've really read into this as well, and we're starting to see, we've been seeing in audits in the last 6 months, is student to trainer and staff ratios. So identifying what those ratios are. And so if you have a student drop, what should that be? If you have a student intake, then what should that be? I found also very interesting is that conflict of interest. So with fit and proper person, and identifying and disclosing real or apparent conflicts of interest.
Yep.
What do you think they may be?
Oh, look, it's hard to know, and any time you include apparent, it's open for interpretation, and I get scared of those types of words, to be honest, because that really does open up. Oh, well, you could have seen that this is going to turn into a conflict, and really, I think in some respects, given that we are educating the next generation in whichever industry that you're in, there is a level of expectation that there is transparency, and I think the conflict of interest scenario is there so that there is transparency over whether, if you go get insurance or if you go get a loan, there's that transparency of commissions that are being paid. And I think this is maybe where it's leading towards, where, it's not under the counter sort of transactions that are encouraging enrollments or things like that. Obviously, after the vet fee helps saga of incentivizing through laptops and payments and so forth, this is where it, I think, all comes into it to say, look, just be transparent with how you operate. And if there is a conflict of interest, declare it.
Yeah. And honesty is always the best policy. I always say, not declaring things and hiding things. Not the way to go. We also touched on the under 18s. What are your thoughts around that child protection?
Yeah, look, I think there's great strength in doing this, especially around the trades area where we do have 16, 17-year-olds that are studying with adults. There's this often perception, depending on the industry that you're in, that swearing and carrying on can impact on someone's experience, and I think we sometimes forget as educators, as RTOs, that if we do have someone under 18, they actually are under 18. There's challenges that come with that, because there's very little literature post-secondary school where someone is let's call them an independent young adult under the age of 18, about what rights and responsibilities they have and are allowed to do with, let's call it, excursions or field trips, etc., within an RTO. So I think there's a lot to unpack with that. But generally speaking, if you are dealing with anyone under 18, whether it's in a first aid course or in cookery or in a trade, there is a level of responsibility that you take on board, and whatever your processes are, it's, in each state, it's important to look at your respective states, whether it's the child protection cards or whatever it is, and just make sure that's in place.
Yeah. And some of the things that we've identified that needs to be particular under fit and proper person is police record checks, as well as child protection, depending on the industry sector. And one thing that I found very interesting is, how are you going to adjust your risk management depending on the learner cohort, and how RTOs are going to implement this. And I see this as a common challenge with RTOs. Is okay, yes, we've got new legislation, but how do we implement that? And in particular, if you've never done risk management before, what would be your top tips for what you need to do if you've never done a risk management register or policy before?
Look, I think, and just before I jump into that, I think what I also hope doesn't happen is, a lot of the time in CRICOS, you've got under the National Code Standard 5, you've got all of these other requirements now that you have to do if you want to deliver to under 18 students. And so a lot of CRICOS providers will opt to avoid any under 18 students from an international market. So I also hope that this doesn't stop or discriminate, I guess, from an age perspective, domestic RTOs saying, no, you've got to be over 18 to study with us. But look, to answer your question, it starts with just understanding what a risk management approach is, and whether you use AI or ChatGPT or anything else to start to build that out for you. But primarily it's about looking at the standards, because it says, where you offer to under 18, risks to their safety and well-being associated with the delivery are identified and managed. And then it says, by having regard to the training content, mode of delivery, and the national principles for child safe organisation. So firstly, start by identifying that. Look at the content that you're delivering. Is it appropriate for under 18 students? Is the language of the learning material appropriate? And then again, if you're doing face-to-face delivery, ensuring that where there is a potential risk identified, where you've got a mixture of under 18 and over 18, that is managed, and that the trainer and assessor actually understand that. And there is a process. We do it in the construction industry through safe work method statements, etc., SWIMS. And so it's almost like doing the same thing, being able to preempt your class to say, hey, in this class, we're going to have 3 under 18s. There's a short course, but these are the things that you need to be aware of. Obviously, if there's any foul language or if there's any inappropriate behaviour, that's controlled and managed accordingly.
Yeah. And I think
it comes down to the trainers as well as the management to from a top-down approach to implement those changes accordingly through, as we've spoken about, continuous improvement, professional development, and so forth.
Yeah, and that's what I was just about to say. I think it's going to be the professional development or team training that they do with their team, so that they understand what they need to be aware of. Yeah, definitely.
Which one of them initially, when reading this, goes, okay, let's do a PD session on national principles of child safe organisations. What is that? Let's look at that. It's never been addressed in the standards before, so let's unpack that and then provide guidance to everyone around that.
Yeah, and there are tools out there to be able to do that. Like, these national principles have actually been around for a while, but it's the first time I've seen it in legislation for RTOs. Awesome. Well, we've gone through a lot today with risk management. So thank you so much for joining us today on the RTO Superhero Podcast. It's been an enlightening discussion about the new standards and in particular looking at risk management. And it is an area that we're both very keen on. And a big thank you to Maciek for sharing your valuable insights and expertise. As we move forward, it's crucial for RTOs to embrace these changes and ensure we are providing management of how we're going to manage this in the future and looking at all of those compliance requirements, but essentially the best practices for sustainable RTOs. So stay tuned for more episodes where we will continue to break down each of the standards from a consultant's point of view and our years of experience in the training industry. So until next time, keep striving for excellence, and I look forward to catching up with you again soon. Thank you for joining us at the RTO Superhero Podcast with me, Angela Connell-Richards. Please take a moment to rate and review the podcast on your preferred podcast app. Each rating and review helps me fulfill my goal of helping training organisations around Australia to learn and grow in compliance and business success.